privilege in their own. Thank you so much for being with me. So you've begun your career as a journalist, an author. You've gone around the world giving workshops, writing workshops for people, and now you're pursuing your interest and hobby into spirituality and exploring psychic mediumship. So first of all, how did this all begin, and how did you get from being a journalist to investigating the psychic mediumship area?
A journalist becomes very good at asking questions about things he or she doesn't understand. And one of the things I'm curious about but don't understand is this whole question of spirituality. The big questions, they're universal questions. Is there a higher spirit? Are we more than our body? What happens when we die? Is there some kind of eternal energy, spirit, whatever you want to call it, that continues to exist somewhere, somehow? Those kind of things have always interested me. And I've been lucky enough to live and visit more than 80 countries, and I've been lucky enough to meet people and seek out people who have some insights and experiences, and I've had some experiences as well. And one thing led to another, and the result is this book, Dead But Still Kicking, which is encounters with mediums, shamans, and spirits, in which I'm maybe talking to spirits through mediums in the UK, Switzerland, Germany, all over Indonesia, and all over Burma, Myanmar.
First of all, you began, as far as I know, you began this in the 30s and 40s, kind of just as a hobby, and you kind of describe it in your book, Dead But Still Kicking, that it was just a hobby, you just wanted to, you saw yourself as a, and I'm going to quote, I was an equal opportunity pigeon. So you were kind of just investigating this out of pure interest and just wanting to learn more about it.
Well, these are big questions that people all over the world ask.
Yeah.
You know, who am I? Why am I here? Is there something else? Is my existence here finished when I die? Ashes to ashes, and so on. Or is there some kind of energy or spirit that continues after we die, somewhere, somehow, someplace? And I haven't found the answer. I'm still curious about it, and I call myself an agnostic spiritualist. I have a bit of an open mind, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah, no, I find it really interesting because all the questions you're asking, specifically in the book as well, are pretty much all the questions I've asked myself at some point in my life, and I know pretty much everyone that I know has asked themselves. But you've actually gone and pursued this, which is what is so fascinating about the book. So you've gone from country to country and just investigated with different mediums, psychics, and whoever you've come across. So how did you come up with the idea in the first place? As in, did you know straight away that you wanted to specifically do this book and learn different things from different psychics, or did it just happen by accident?
Well, for much of my life I've spoken to mediums, collecting information, and written about those things. And then I realized that this would make an interesting book, I think, to put things into a more coherent form. So some of the stories in the book are conversations with historical figures like Alfred Russel Wallace and his Malay assistant named Ali. I speak to a female vampire ghost in Borneo. I speak with the Queen of the Southern Ocean in Java, who is the consort of the Sultans of Yogyakarta. I speak with my father. I speak with nature spirits, and I use that term very broadly. I don't. When you speak with spirits, you don't have a conversation like we're having now.
Yeah.
It's like you're listening to an FM radio in the car, and you're at the very end of the range, and go blip, blip, or a little bit telegraphic, or a very bad internet connection, and you don't have a sensible person-to-person discussion about things. Also, because I'm not a medium, I'm working through mediums, he or she is making the contact, and sometimes that person isn't speaking English. The person might be speaking Burmese, which I don't speak, so I have to use a translator. That person might be speaking Indonesian, which I do speak, but they might be using a local dialect or an archaic form. So there's a lot lost in translation as well. I'll give you one example. I was in a rural village way up the Irrawaddy River in Burma. It's a fishing village. And there was a shaman in the village, a very pleasant old lady, about 85 years old, and she could talk to the river spirits. And the river spirits there are very important because they ensure that people have good fishing. And she goes into a trance like that. And as an aside, that's one thing that Asian mediums tend to do more than European mediums. European mediums can double task. They can talk to the spirits at the same time that they're talking to the individual.
Yeah.
Without going into a trance. Asian mediums prefer to zap themselves and go into another dimension right away. So this sweet old lady is talking to the spirits, and I said, how can the spirit help people to have good fishing? What do they have to do? And she said, the fishermen have to throw their rubbish into the river. And I said, okay. And I had trouble figuring that out because it just seemed wrong on so many different levels. And later on I was talking to my guide. He was also confused, and then I said, look, I think what was the word she used in Burmese, and he told me, and it was rubbish or garbage, but we thought about it not from a Western point of view but from a Burmese point of view, and we figured out that what she was actually saying was, because they're Buddhists, Theravada Buddhists, the fishermen should get rid of their bad thoughts, evil thoughts, unproductive thoughts, behaviors, and symbolically throw that rubbish into the river.
Also, like release the negative emotions from them, from themselves.
And that makes perfect sense if you look at it like that. But that's one of the difficulties when you're trying to record conversations, is not only hearing the words, but trying to figure out what the words mean. Because a lot of the mediums will tell you that the spirits are talking in allegories, they're talking in metaphors, and they're not being direct. Sometimes they're playing games and asking you to do some work.
Did you encounter that a lot?
Yeah. So you put all that together, and there's another factor that a lot of people who go to mediums have selective hearing. People who go to mediums often are going for issues of bereavement, grief. Granny has died. I want to make sure Granny is okay.
Yeah.
And this is a way of helping them. And they will latch on to things selectively. Because sometimes mediums are what I call fishing. Sometimes mediums are throwing out ideas to see which one has traction.
Exactly.
And that's why I think this book is interesting, is that I'm trying to record the actual conversations and annotate the conversations and identify places where the medium is, in my mind, fishing for a result. There was another dynamic, particularly in Asia, particularly when I wanted to speak with this young man, the spirit of this young man named Ali. Now, Ali was hired by Alfred Russel Wallace, the great British naturalist, explorer, developer of the theory of evolution. And he was hired by Wallace when Ali was 15 years old. He was an innocent, naive, illiterate teenager who had never left his village. Yet he became important to Wallace, and Wallace was important to him. They had a mentor-mentor relationship. I would go to see mediums in Ternate, far eastern Indonesia, and I must have seen half a dozen mediums there. And I'd go in there and I'd say, I'd like to talk with Ali. And I'd give them as little information as possible. I'd say he worked with Wallace. Yeah. Now, the Indonesian mediums I saw wanted to help, but they also inflated Ali's positioning because they figured, here's a foreigner coming to our village asking about this guy named Ali, therefore Ali must have been a very important person. They didn't want to think that Ali was an unimportant, illiterate, uneducated young boy.
Presumed that he was someone very important.
They conflated Ali. So one medium would tell me that he was the admiral of the Sultan's fleet. And she saw him dressed in a formal military uniform, a tall, elegant man. Well, Ali was a short little guy, and he was certainly no admiral. Another medium said, well, he's buried in this particular place. And I said, let's go. So I went outside and we got a local transport and we hopped in. Half an hour later we went up and they took me to the tomb of Sultan Babula in Ternate. Now, Sultan Babula is the most famous Sultan of Ternate. The airport is named after him. He's a big deal in Ternate. Yeah. And they took me to a tomb. Malay tombs don't have any. They have headstones, but there's no inscription on them. Oh, okay. So they took me to a tomb that was almost adjacent to that of Sultan Babula. And they said, this is where Ali is. I said, hold on. There's two big things wrong with this. One, Sultan Babula lived 300 years before Ali. Number two, Ali was a commoner. there's no reason in the world that he would be buried in the place of Babula's wife, for example. So they thought about it, and they came up with the idea that it was because Ali was a tariqat. Tariqat is a Sufi word.
Yeah.
You know,
I know
you've heard the
more
word.
or less. Yeah.
For a grand mystic.
Yeah.
And they rationalized that was why Ali was buried next to Babula. And I think they did it, maybe they weren't even conscious of it. And I think they did it in good faith. But they were putting their cultural spin on things. Yeah. And European mediums would put a cultural European spin if I'm asking about something exotic. And that's part of the deal, actually, is that everything has a cultural coloring.
Yeah, it's almost like it goes through that filter before the information gets through to you.
Yeah, so there's no pure information.
Yeah.
Plus, we remember what we choose to remember, and we interpret it as we wish to interpret it. So this is it's a very fuzzy kind of activity that we're involved in. It's a very spacey kind of thing, and it's, from my point of view, there is no proof. I like science. There's no proof. There's no hard evidence that there are spirits. Now, you can go to the library and find a zillion books where people say this happened, so therefore it must be true. You have many experiences, and people there will tell you, yes, this happened, it's true.
Yeah.
And I remember a conversation I had with the former Sultan of Yogyakarta in Java, in Indonesia. Now this man was European educated, so he spoke Dutch, German, English, Indonesian, and 4 levels of Javanese.
Oh, wow.
He was a vice president of the country, former minister of economics, former minister of defense. And he, like all the other sultans, owe their power to the mermaid queen, the queen of the Southern Ocean.
So they believe in nature spirits a lot there.
Well, one particular, this queen of the Southern Ocean. Now, I had a meeting with him, and I tried to say in a polite way, what's this deal with you and the mermaid queen? And he started to tell me stories about how during difficult times, like the war against Japan after World War II, the Independence War against the Dutch, and so on, how he would meditate and she would help him and advise him and so on. And I kept on pushing him, well, is she real? Do you really believe this? Because every year on his birthday, he would go and make offerings in the sea. His fingernails, his hair, his clothes. This is serious stuff for a late 20th century sultan, because he's a modern man. And he said, look, you're asking a Western question. He said, part of my brain is a Western brain. I think in Dutch. Yeah? He said, part of my brain is a Javanese brain. Now, a Javanese brain is very mystical.
Yeah.
He said, you're asking a Western question that requires a yes or no, black or white answer. He said, it's not, you can't do that. You either believe it or you don't believe it.
And you don't need proof for it.
In Indonesian, you say, percaya, tidak percaya, up to you. And I thought that was, it was almost like the line from Hamlet. there are more things in our philosophy. And you believe it or you don't believe it, and that's your choice. Good for you. Whatever you choose is okay. But sometimes if you try to peel it away and examine it, you wind up with air. There's nothing there. And I think that's not a bad way to explore this kind of stuff.
No, yeah, you're right. It's it's a good way to look at it from sort of a rational perspective. I like the way you do it because you go to different mediums and different people and you ask very similar questions about Alfred Wallace, and so you ask them the same question and see what answer they come up with. But I guess even you yourself say in the book, that there's several things that a lot of them say that are very similar and exact, to be precise. So these are the things that you just can't explain away with just saying, oh, they're just guesses or they're just common sense. So these are the things that really, I guess, eat at you, isn't it? Because you're trying to understand them rationally, but then there's no rational explanation other than this is true.
I'll give you one interesting experience. At the College of Psychic Studies in London, there's a medium called June Eleni. And I did a reading with her over Skype. Okay. And I didn't tell her I wanted to speak with Alfred Russel Wallace. I said I wanted to speak with Alfred. Just Alfred. And she said, okay. So she plugged into Alfred, I think. And she was telling things that even people who knew about Wallace in general would not have known. And June Eleni has the ability to also do psychic drawing. And while she's talking to me, she's drawing. She's drawing a portrait of Alfred. And at the end of it, she shows me the drawing. And it was remarkably like Wallace. And I said, oh, this is really interesting. But you forgot his glasses. His whole life he wore thin, wire-rimmed John Lennon-like glasses. She said, no, I didn't. He told me about the glasses, and if you look very closely at the original, you'll see that he has glasses. And then about a week later, she was in the college and she spoke to the president of the college. And she told her about this experience. And the president took her up to the 4th floor where June Eleni had never been. And there on the wall was a portrait of Wallace, because Wallace was a spiritualist. And he was involved in the early activities of the College of Psychic Studies. Now, this is the drawing that June Eleni drew. And then this is a portrait of Wallace.
Oh, wow.
And for me, this is a pretty good likeness.
Yeah, they're remarkably
of Wallace.
similar.
Considering that I had not told her that I'm talking to Wallace, I just said I'm talking to Alfred. I want to talk to Alfred. And I'd asked her questions about Wallace and his relationship with Darwin.
Mm-hmm. Like you did with all the others as well.
Like I did with all the others.
Yeah.
And she got real physical reaction. She said the hair just stood up on my head. Anyway, so is that proof? I don't know what it is, but it was certainly an interesting thing. And there were a few experiences like that where you have flashes of insight that I can't explain.
Has your view changed from the very beginning of exploring spirituality to now? Has it changed, and in what way has it changed?
Have I changed?
Has your view on spirituality changed?
Hasn't changed. I'm still skeptical. I'm still curious. I've had experiences that sometimes were nonsense and sometimes were intriguing. And I'm not proselytizing for the existence of spirits. And people like that really try my patience, because there's a lot of people out there that are cheerleaders for the existence of ghosts and spirits. But I also believe that there are things that happen in our lives that we can't explain. And so much of our lives are based on things that are not logical, like emotions. Why do you like somebody or not like somebody? Why do you feel comfortable in one place or not another place? Why do you have intuition? These questions are not, we haven't found out the place in the brain and where they exist and why they exist. So neurophysiology can't explain it. And those kind of questions intrigue me, because there are things in the world that we have a hard time rationalizing. And even the physicists who are studying quantum physics are talking about things that you can't really prove.
Yeah.
You have to accept it or you don't accept it. Mm-hmm. And it forces you to look at life and the world in a different way.
Do you think the problem with that is because we're trying to test something that is non-physical through physical means?
Well, part of our brain is a left brain, Western logic, information, Wikipedia, statistics, good spelling, good grammar. We need that. That's good stuff. Part of our thinking, part of our communication is, let's call it the right brain or the heart. That's emotion, that's story, that's questions, that's speculation, imagination, dreams. And that is not quantifiable. And we are both. If you want to generalize, we in the West have more emphasis on the left brain side. Perhaps the people I speak to in Asia have more abilities to contact the right brain, heart side. But we all have, everybody has both and we need both.
Yeah.
That makes us balanced, that makes us human. And this whole question of spirits doesn't exist in the left brain. It exists in the right brain, where it's it's unproductive to try to examine it under a microscope, because you probably won't find anything there. Nevertheless, if you want to find something there, it's there. And that's my conclusion.